and really bad outcomes, including death. So what if we could teach your body to do all the things that it normally does without getting sick? And really, that's what a vaccine does. It teaches your body to fight pathogens like the coronavirus, SARS-CoV-2, without getting ill. A vaccine helps your body produce antibodies without getting the disease and avoiding the risk of severe illness. And so how does that actually happen? So vaccines can teach your body to fight pathogens. How does that work? Let me pass it over to Gayatri, and she'll cover some of the high level as to how a vaccine works.
Thanks, Jay. So yeah, I think that it's first off to just clarify what is in the vaccine. So the spike protein is the part of the coronavirus that causes your cells to get sick. So the spike protein is on the outside part of the coronavirus, and it attaches to your cells and infects it. And over time, that infection grows in the body. So when scientists were figuring out how to help people to create the ability to immunize themselves against COVID-19, they focused on the spike protein in order to make sure that the human body knew how to fight off the infection against specifically the spike protein. Can you? Yeah, okay. So the spike protein is made up of both mRNA or DNA. So the spike protein, mRNA, and DNA is put into the coronavirus vaccine. And that vaccine then is put into the body, where it goes into your cells and allows your cells to create the spike protein temporarily on the surface of your cells. Once it's on the surface of your cells, this temporary spike protein only lasts for 48 hours maximum. And in those 48 hours, your body learns how to make the antibodies against spike protein. And antibodies are basically your body's way of finding an infected cell and knowing how to kill it on the spot. So with having the spike protein on the surface of the cells in this very short period of time, your body learns how to defend itself against COVID in all instances. So after you've been immunized and the spike protein goes off from the surface of your cells, you are left with the ability to fight off COVID in the future if you ever encounter it.
Great. So as Gayatri covered, when you receive a vaccine, your body learns enough to avoid the worst consequences of COVID virus exposure. The important thing to remember is that, as Gayatri mentioned, none of the vaccines will give you COVID-19 or alter your DNA. As Gayatri covered, it's really just to show your body what a spike protein looks like. It's like a picture. And your body will learn from all of the vaccines, any of the vaccines that it receives, your body will learn from. And the final point to sort of remember about these vaccines is that the side effects that you experience are your body learning how to fight COVID-19. So the side effects are part of the natural immune process as it's developing those antibodies, as your T cells are forming. Those are all part of the natural process of learning. So in the news, there's been a lot of coverage about different variants or mutations that are popping up all over the world, and that's caused a lot of concern for a lot of people. So what's happening here? Well, the spike protein that your body recognizes and that triggers your immune response is changing. That is primarily what's driving the variants that are showing up all around the world. This process of mutation is normal, and it happens all the time. The thing is, the viruses, as viruses replicate, they don't have the tools that they need to make sure that they stay the way that they should. So these editing tools or checks and balances to make sure that the virus stays the way that it did before it replicated. And so these mutations get introduced in the process. This is totally normal. And as far as we know, the vaccines that are on the market today that are available, authorized, and available to all of us still prevent severe illness, even when exposed to the variants that we've detected. So as I mentioned, the thing to remember is that the spike proteins are the things that are mutating. And this is akin to the virus changing costume. So maybe it showed up without a hat, but now with a mutation or in a variant, it's showing up with a hat or with a beanie or with a clown hat. And even with those hats on, a vaccinated body can still recognize the virus, can still recognize those spike proteins and mobilize the immune system's responses to defend your body against really severe illness. So let me hand it over to Cassia to talk about the vaccines that are available. Now we've covered a little bit about the virus and the mutations.
Sure, thank you. And hi again, everyone. This table here on the slide shows the vaccines that are currently available in the US, at least the 3 that are in the square, or what have been authorized by the FDA within the US. As most people know, is the Pfizer, Moderna, and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. The main things to note practically about the differences between these two is Pfizer and Moderna are both 2 doses. Pfizer is 3 weeks apart, Moderna is 4 weeks apart, whereas Johnson & Johnson is just 1 dose. In the clinical trials, the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine had around a 95% efficacy at preventing symptomatic disease. Johnson & Johnson around 66%, but those trials were done a little later and included sites in South Africa where some of the variants were circulating, which pulled down that number a little bit. In the US, it was over 70%. But all of them were highly effective at preventing hospitalization and death, which are really the important outcomes. The other major difference is in their transport and storage requirements. The Pfizer and Moderna vaccines require freezers, whereas the Johnson & Johnson vaccine can be refrigerated. So those are some of the sort of practical differences between them. Next slide. So this is a table that shows the contraindications or reasons why people should not get a vaccine. I think it's really important to note that it's recommended for almost everyone, except people who have a history of severe allergies to the ingredients of these vaccines. There, that's in sort of red zone. Don't vaccinate and kind of talk to your doctor or immunologist. Those who have had allergic reactions to other vaccines can be vaccinated. They do recommend sort of watching for a longer period of time afterwards to catch any immediate allergic reactions. But that's the sort of yellow zone, proceed with caution. But then pretty much anyone else can get the vaccine. That includes people with allergies to other medicines, history of food allergies or other kind of environmental allergies. All of those can get the vaccine. And, depending on your history of allergies, you might be watched for a little longer, but it's still recommended. Of note, too, it's also recommended for pregnant and lactating women, people with immune compromised conditions. It's essentially recommended for almost everyone. Next slide. It's also important to remember, even though these vaccines were developed relatively quickly and seem relatively new, they were a product of very, very large trials with tens of thousands of participants enrolled in the trials. And even since then, more people have been given the vaccine and the effects of it have been monitored. Next slide. There's also sometimes questions around what an emergency use authorization means, or an EUA for the FDA. And this is essentially something the FDA employs or does when there's an emergency, when it's a public health emergency, when there's no other viable option for a particular disease. And the benefits of a therapy or a vaccine in this case outweigh the risks. This also helps speed up the process because production and the testing of the vaccine can happen at the same time. So you don't have to wait. Normally, drug companies will wait for testing and then approval before they start production. In this case, because all the resources were dedicated towards this vaccine, production started at the same time as the testing. And so once approval was completed, distribution could proceed. Next slide. As I mentioned before, aside from the clinical trials, there have been over 500 million doses of all vaccines administered already worldwide. In the US, it's around 150 million doses. And the CDC and other public health agencies do continue to monitor side effects of the vaccines after they've been administered. And so for aside from the allergic reactions, there really hasn't been anything picked up on in this data that suggests that there are any safety concerns with it. Next slide. So aside from personal health and safety, it is really important to think about vaccines as the way that we get back to normal. So it's not just our own health, but it's helping society recover from this epidemic. Next slide. To do this, we really need to get enough people vaccinated. So going from a low immunization rate to a high immunization rate, and the faster, the better. Next slide. And this is because of the concept of herd immunity. And I just want to take a moment to explain it because I know it's been talked about a lot in the media. But herd immunity talks about the percentage of people, proportion of people who are immune to a disease, either through having had it previously or being vaccinated. So on this slide, if you see the little pink person as the person who first enters a community with a disease, and the yellow people are people who are susceptible, so people who aren't immune for whatever reason, and the green people are those who are immune. When only a small proportion or a certain proportion of the population has been vaccinated, the disease can spread pretty rapidly because there are enough, in this case, yellow people, that the disease can spread through the community fairly quickly. Next slide. But if we get to the point where enough people have been vaccinated, so more of the people are green in this diagram, even if somebody enters the community with an infectious disease or communicable disease, it doesn't travel very far. So herd immunity really protects the whole population, including people who haven't been vaccinated. Once we sort of reach that threshold, then we can stop the disease in its tracks. Okay, next slide. All right, I'll hand it back over to Jarjieh.
So now we've gone over the vaccine, why we might want to get it, and what the benefits of the vaccine are. Let's talk about some of the resources that are available to you to book an appointment in New York. Of course, we'll send all of this out to you after this town hall so that you can look at it at your leisure. So the first resource that's available is New York City's own vaccinefinder.newyorkcity.gov. This site aggregates public-private vaccine sites from across the city and helps you book an appointment. If you're having trouble with the website, there's also a telephone number that you can call right at the top there, 877-VAX4-NYC. It's a great site. New York City recently launched an in-home COVID-19 vaccination program for New York City residents who are homebound. And so you can request a homebound vaccination using this form at the top here. It's a program designed to help individuals get vaccinated right in their home if they're unable to make it to a vaccination site. And there are some amazing volunteer-driven efforts in New York City if you're having some trouble with the other available resources. Turbovax.info is a vaccine appointment aggregator that pulls data from a variety of different sources. And finally, this is a volunteer-driven effort called NYCVaccineList.com that also aggregates available appointments all over the city. These sites can help you get vaccinated if you're eligible to get vaccinated at this time. As of this week, that's everybody 30 and older here in New York. If you're not yet eligible to get vaccinated, there is
Jarjieh's frozen. So I'm going to, is he back?
I think his Wi-Fi may have just dropped for a second, so.
Okay. Cool.
Let me see if I can actually pull up the slides from my side.
Oh, good.
All right.
Nope.
Let me see this. All right, and when Jabe jumps back in, we can. I'll just let him take back over. But so just going back from what he had said. So I think we were here on TurboVax. So yeah, there are a variety of different resources for vaccination in New York. So this NYC vaccine list is a curation of these, which is through looking at a similar type of data aggregation that is used for TurboVax. Additionally, there is Doctor.B, which is for a standby list for leftover COVID vaccines. And this basically means that if you are, eligible, if you'd like to have a COVID vaccine, but you are not able to get one through the NYC system or through the TurboVax, this allows you to wait for any vaccines that have already been thawed, but are still going to be needed to be dispersed before the end of the day or within 6 hours. You can use this portal to find those vaccine opportunities. So next, we would just like to talk a little bit about how to talk with friends and family about getting vaccinated and what it means to be vaccinated. So it's very important to validate any fears and questions that, oh, I think Jay's back. Okay. Jay, are you with us? All right. All right, I'm gonna let you take back over.
Sure. Sorry about that, folks, with some internet difficulties. Gayatri, if you can continue sharing, that would be amazing.
Sure.
So as Gayatri was talking about, it's really important to make sure that your friends and family feel heard and that they understand that these questions are real and they represent your friends and family being cautious about their health. So take that time to really make sure that they feel heard and that you listen to what makes them nervous. And then you can move on to asking some open-ended questions about what they're feeling and thinking. For example, what concerns do you have about the vaccine? And then once you've taken that time to listen, maybe you can ask for some permission to share a bit about what you've learned. Maybe you had the same concern and you want them to know that you found an answer that really spoke to that question. And I think what's important here is, and I think we can be all guilty of this, I certainly am, is being so passionate about what you've learned about the vaccine and wanting to really share that information in a way that could be seen as combative or argumentative. Instead of arguing, I think a really powerful tool is just to focus on the fact that the vaccine is safer than the disease itself and that it can prevent you from catching and spreading COVID-19. Really focus on disease prevention. If you're looking for additional resources, next slide, Gayatri, there are some amazing tools and talking points that are available to you on the web, and you can peruse those and see if any of those are helpful to you in your conversations with friends and family. And so with that, now that we've power walked our way through some background, let's turn it over to some Q&A. We had some amazing questions submitted in the chat, and we also had some great questions submitted beforehand. I'll start with some of the questions that were submitted beforehand. There's been a lot of questions about the efficacy of the vaccine. How and what does the vaccine actually protect us from? Is it a complete immunity? Is it symptoms? Is it hospitalization? What does the vaccine protect us from?
So in terms of the clinical trials that were done with the vaccine, the endpoint was, did people get sick? Which is one reason why the question is still open about whether the vaccine can completely protect someone from carrying the virus. In the real world experience that we've seen since, what's been the most remarkable is the robust protection against severe disease, hospitalization, and death with all three vaccines. And that's been really impressive. As vaccines go, these vaccines are extraordinarily effective.
Thanks, Dr. Fisher. We know that the vaccines work really well, as you mentioned. There are some questions about vaccine safety. And so I think the first one here is, have there been any deaths directly attributable to the administration of the vaccine? And go ahead.
No, there haven't. The reason that this gets confusing is that on any given day, right, a certain number of people are going to die of a stroke or a heart attack or something else. If those people happen to have gotten the COVID vaccine the day before or the week before, it's natural for us to think, oh, maybe it's connected. So the only way to really look at it is to look at, have the death rates from things like stroke or heart attack or anything else increased in this country with 150 million vaccines given? And the answer is no. So as far as we know, there is no reason to believe that the vaccine has been the cause of any of these deaths.
How about long-term effects of the vaccine? This was a question for us here is you know, what long-term effects have we seen or might we see from the vaccine?
This is a great question. The most specific answer is we don't know, because the vaccine hasn't been around long enough. But the more general and reassuring answer is that vaccines in general are not associated with long-term side effects. In general, when it comes to the side effects of vaccines, what you see is what you get. So the kind of achiness you might get the day after you get your second shot of Pfizer or Moderna, those are the kinds of side effects associated with vaccines. Vaccines in general are not associated with long-term side effects, but we cannot say specifically, just because these vaccines haven't been around long enough, that there aren't long-term side effects. But there's absolutely no reason to believe that there would be.
To go back to the death question for a moment here, deaths associated with vaccines, Ivelisse is followed up, is asking, what if the death was due to the vaccine? And by looking at death rates, we're bypassing that fact. Dr. Fisher or Dr. Wells, would you like to talk a little bit about that?
I can just say, if the vaccines were causing deaths, we would expect increase in the death rates of whatever the reason, you know, that the vaccine was killing people. And we have not seen that with 500 million vaccines given around the world. So I think that the evidence is really very strong that these vaccines are not associated with fatalities.
Yes, and just to add, you know, the CDC does still collect information after the vaccine rollout, and you know, any deaths that are reported are often investigated thoroughly by the FDA, and so far none of them have been attributed to the vaccine. They've always been underlying other reasons why someone died. So at least in the US, no deaths that I know of have been directly attributed to the vaccine.
So good follow-up, Ivelisse. And I think maybe the thing that I would add to that follow-up question there is that this is the most intensely scrutinized vaccine, both in clinical trials and in the real world, that we've had in recent memory. And this question of death and severe side effects is actually forefront of any scientist working on vaccine rollout or vaccine surveillance. And so this is definitely something that is carefully looked at and will continue to be looked at. Entire systems have been built to make sure that we don't miss anything as severe as death, and capture even minor things like achiness surveillance systems. So we're being very thoughtful about how we measure the impact of these vaccines on people's lives.
And what I would add is that COVID, we know, causes lots and lots of deaths. There's no doubt or no question about that. So you have to balance a vaccine for which there's no evidence that it causes death with a disease for which there's lots and lots and lots of evidence that it causes death. And it's an individual choice that people have to make.
Thank you for that addition. There's been a lot of questions about who should get the vaccine, particularly with regards to different diseases or underlying conditions that they might have. Would either of you like to talk broadly about that question and what guidance you might be able to offer folks who are concerned about their underlying conditions or sensitivities and accepting the vaccine?
Sure. Many underlying conditions put you at increased risk for severe complications if you get COVID. And that's the reason why people with underlying conditions were prioritized in the rollout of the vaccine. So if you can get even sicker from COVID with underlying conditions, that is a great reason to get vaccinated. There are really no underlying conditions other than allergy to the components of the vaccine that are an absolute contraindication. And most underlying conditions are actually a really good reason to get vaccinated.
Awesome.
I following off of that, I think Laura just asked a question in the chat that kind of is a tangent from the doctor's response, which is about autoimmune diseases that are escalated by chemicals. How can we determine if the vaccine is safe in the long term? Can you talk about studies that might have been done in this regard?
There are, I believe, ongoing studies at this time on folks with autoimmune diseases. Plenty of folks with autoimmune diseases have been vaccinated safely. If you want specifics, my suggestion is go to the website clinicaltrials.gov to see if there are any ongoing studies.
Thank you. We've gotten a lot of questions about why there are so many different vaccines all over the world and here in New York. We've talked about 3 of them. Why do we have so many vaccines? Why isn't it just one, like the mumps, measles, rubella vaccine? Why do we have so many?
Because our government and other governments hedge their bets by funding a number of different manufacturers to work on developing vaccines, some with similar mechanisms, some with different mechanisms, in the hope that at least some of them would work well. And that's the way it's turned out. We have a number that have worked well.
Yeah, I'd also just add practically no single manufacturer could produce the volume that's required in this world and meet the demand of this world. And so having multiple companies with their products, as long as they all are efficacious and work, will help meet especially the short-term demand for the vaccines, which is several billion worldwide at this moment.
And in fact, the company Merck, which was not successful at developing its own vaccine, has rededicated facilities to helping manufacture, I believe it's the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. So there's even the unheard of the cooperation between competing pharma companies.
Awesome. So we've got a number of questions about booster shots, about whether this will become an annual vaccine, when those booster shots or annual vaccines might come around. What do we know about this? What do we know about needing to get vaccinated in the future?
I would just say the short answer is we don't know yet. These are new vaccines. We don't know whether this is going to confer a lifelong immunity or whether we're going to need boosters. And we don't know whether some variants will emerge that need a slightly altered vaccine as a booster shot. So right now, we just do not know the answer to that.
I would also just like to add that boosters are very common for a variety of infections, and if a booster is needed in the future, that it's nothing that would be out of the norm for any infectious diseases. So it's not like you have to worry too much about having to. It's not going to be necessarily a whole new vaccine. It's going to be just a slightly tailored vaccine to meet the new needs.
Cassia, I saw that you wanted to jump in, Dr. Wells.
Oh, no, I was just going to add that, this is a rapidly changing situation and more data is getting collected all the time. Just to point out that the clinical trials are still ongoing. So they're still following up on their participants, trying to see how long the immunity lasts. So as time goes, we should get better data that will help us understand how long the immunity lasts from these vaccines.
We had a question here from Laura about the use of fetal cell or fetal cell lines in the vaccines, and I can tackle that question. In the manufacturing of all 3 vaccines that are available here in the US, none use fetal cell lines as part of the manufacturing process. So what you receive has no fetal cell tissue or relation to fetal cell tissue. However, the mRNA vaccines, Moderna and Pfizer, did use fetal cell tissue as part of their laboratory testing to ensure initially that the vaccines elicited a good immune response. And so if that's something that you're considering, that's something that's important to you, I would suggest doing a little bit of Googling as well. There's plenty of sites available that provide really great information. We'll follow up with a couple of resources for you on the use of fetal cells in the testing process. None use it in the manufacturing process. Anything to add?
Yeah, I would just add that the Vatican has issued a statement that it believes that the imperative of getting vaccinated and preventing disease overrides any moral consideration for Catholics about the use of any fetal cells in the development of the vaccines.
A great addition. Thank you, Dr. Fisher. Okay, so I've got one last question on our pre-submission list, and then we can turn it over to Lori to run through some of our chat questions. We've got many. Last question here is around side effects. So folks have acknowledged that side effects are great, are a part of the immune response. Some folks have been wondering, what if I don't get side effects? All of these folks have been talking about their side effects. What if I don't get a side effect? Is that a bad thing? Do I have to worry about that?
No, you don't. It's just individually how you experience the gearing up of your immune system. And some people get them, some people don't. They tend to be a little less common in older people. It's nothing to worry about.
Awesome. Okay. On to you, Lori.
Okay, so let's go to the chat. So our first 2 questions kind of are similar in if there's another vaccine that could be in conflict with the COVID vaccine. Like the one question asked if I had an allergy as a baby to pertussis vaccine, is it safe for me to get COVID? And the other question asked about the flu shot. She didn't get her flu shot. She's wondering if she'll get a bad reaction to the COVID vaccine. So are there any conflicts with other vaccines?
Yeah. So if the person had it depends on what kind of a reaction to the pertussis vaccine, but that would be a cause for caution, more extended observation, and maybe a discussion with their healthcare provider about the specifics. In terms of the flu vaccine, our general recommendation is absolutely get the flu vaccine too, but have a wait of 2 weeks between getting the flu vaccine and the COVID vaccine.
But if she hasn't received her flu vaccine, can she get the COVID vaccine first and then
sure.
get the flu vaccine?
Sure.
Okay. All right, so let's go on to, oh, this is a good question. And actually, my mother takes Tylenol, and I had heard the question is, how soon after the second shot can I take Tylenol, Motrin? I'd heard that you might not want to take Tylenol before you get the shot, but I've heard after you get the shot, it's okay. But what is the situation?
So there's a theoretical argument that you might not want to take, especially an anti-inflammatory like Motrin before getting the shot, because you don't want your immune system to you want your immune system at its peak, and anti-inflammatories suppress the immune system a little bit. That's basically a theoretical argument. After the shot, if Tylenol or Motrin are what you usually take, if you have aches or a fever or whatever, it's perfectly fine to take them.
Okay. Right. Okay, here's a question from Nora. I'm not too sure if I had COVID around a month ago. I did have symptoms, but they were not serious. Only that I lost my sense of smell and taste for 7 days, and I was never tested. What are the dangers of getting vaccinated now?
There are no dangers in getting vaccinated now. We recommend the vaccination for people who have had COVID, as well as people who have not. People can get the vaccination as soon as their isolation period is over, or they can feel free to wait for up to 90 days based on CDC guidance, because the feeling is you probably have antibodies to COVID for at least that long after you've had it. So absolutely no reason not to get the vaccine, whether or not what you had was COVID.
Okay. Here's another one from Celia. I'm a breast cancer survivor. I have to use tamoxifen for 10 years. How does the vaccine interact with my treatment?
There's no specific interaction, but you should discuss your situation with your own healthcare provider.
Okay. A question from Karina. After getting the second shot, can I be around family if I have symptoms?
Is the family also vaccinated? If you have symptoms, no, you should not be around anybody. If you have symptoms, you mean symptoms of COVID or just a reaction to the vaccine?
She's not clear. I'm going to take the leap and say, what if she gets COVID after the second shot? It just says after getting the second shot, if I have symptoms. She might be asking about the reaction.
Sorry, Laura. Karina has just clarified that it's side effects of the vaccine. She's asking.
Okay. No problem being around family.
Great. Question from Cassandra. What is the third Pfizer dose for?
I do not know about a third Pfizer dose, so I'll hand that off to anybody else. I'm only aware of 2 doses.
Okay. All right. So, is there any information on future side effects of the vaccines? That's from Maria.
As was mentioned, the people in the original clinical trials continue to be followed. These vaccines have now, been in use in people we're pushing a year between pre-approval and use, and so far nothing in terms of unexpected or long-term side effects. And again, as I mentioned, vaccines in general, if you get side effects, you tend to get them right away within a few days, not years down the road kind of thing.
Okay, we have an update from Cassandra about that third dose. She said she's heard about it as being a possible booster shot that they're studying. Do you have any?
So both Moderna and Pfizer are concerned that there may come variants that the current vaccine does not work that well against. And so they're looking at tweaking a booster dose. But right now, the good news is the vaccine seemed to work very well against preventing severe disease from all the current circulating variants.
This is a question from Ezra. He's saying, is it true that vaccinated people still have to wear a mask after their 2 doses of the COVID-19 vaccine?
That's both the guidance from the CDC and our city health department. The reason being that no vaccine's 100% effective. So even if it's 90 or 95% effective, there's still a chance of getting sick. And also, we don't know for sure how effective the vaccines are in preventing someone from carrying the virus without getting sick. And so we don't want people transmitting the virus to other people. So right now, the guidance is yes, please continue to wear a mask, social distance, all those things. We'll see, hopefully in the future, as we learn more, that guidance can change.
Okay.
And I'll just
another
add,
question.
I think, sorry, Lori, I'll just add to that answer from Dr. Fisher is, and we'll share a link in the chat in just a moment. So the CDC has provided some really helpful guidance on what you can do after you get vaccinated. There are some wonderful things that you're allowed to do now once you get your vaccine that they would suggest that you not do if you don't have a vaccine. And so that includes seeing small gatherings of friends and family. And so I'll share that out. But there is some wonderful things that we can do, like go and hug your mom that I haven't been able to do in a really long time.
So have all of us. Okay, so another question for Maria. She asks, I heard something about Pfizer being linked to preventing cancer. Do you know anything about this?
I don't, but the technology of the mRNA vaccines is probably going to become an important platform in the development of anti-cancer vaccines.
Okay, that's interesting. Another question from Laura. This is also connected to I think, hold on. I looked at, I've got her now. What if you're dependent on anti-inflammatory meds and Tylenol to control disease symptoms? Would you have to refrain from taking those drugs before the vaccine?
You should discuss that with your individual health provider, but my guess would be you would be told to just continue doing what you usually do as you're getting the vaccine.
All right. Once again, I was noticing there's a lot of questions in the feed about boosters. When I'm going to guess that the general idea, I think, is do we just have to kind of wait and see to find out when we will need to take a booster, or do we have any more data that would kind of give us an idea?
No, we really have to wait for the ongoing studies to be completed. There are really 2 kinds of boosters. One is a booster because immunity can fade over time. That's like the tetanus boosters that you get. And then there's a booster because the virus is changing. That's like the flu, the annual flu shot that you get. So we really have to wait and see whether either kinds of those boosters are going to be necessary.
Okay. I think we covered, wait a minute, see a new message. Scrolling. Okay.
Oh, I'd love to answer this one.
That's a good way. Go ahead.
I got vaccinated the minute I was eligible and could get an appointment. And I had a sore arm after dose 1. I had a day of sort of malaise and low-grade fever, tiredness, achiness about a day after dose 2, and that was that. And I am so happy I did.
I've only had 1 shot and also had a sore arm. It was like a little sore during the day of vaccination. I got a little bit more sore the second day, but after that, fine. And yeah, very happy I got it. Anybody else on the panel?
Other panelists want to tell all?
I got mine. I got the Pfizer regimen early in January as a healthcare provider. As soon as possible. Essentially, I went and got them both. Yes, sore arm. Day 2 with my first one, I had a bad headache and maybe a little fatigue, but otherwise, went pretty smoothly.
I also got vaccinated. I got Pfizer. And what is so funny is after the first one, I was convinced that I would avoid the side effects because my brother took me on a run and I was very comfortable. I didn't feel any achiness. And then after the second dose, I had 24 hours of what I could only describe as kind of like the flu, and then it was gone. So the first dose was nothing. The second dose was not super comfortable, but it was gone pretty quickly.
I heard that you feel like a superhero after the side effects are over with, that it's like you're a new person. Is that true for you?
Right. I don't
think
know.
it's just joy.
It's mentally. But I guess to emphasize for the audience that, we consider you sort of fully vaccinated 2 weeks after your last dose. So
yes. That's a very important point.
Yeah.
Well, as we're coming up to the top of the hour here, I think we've covered as many questions as we could. Gayatri, if you wouldn't mind advancing the next slide, we'll send out a synopsis of all of the answers that we've provided here today, as well as the PowerPoint. But if you have any other questions, you can feel free to drop an email to us, and we'll try to get back to you as soon as we can. And we'll try to spread the questions around and make sure the right person is answering your question as they come in. So thank you so much for joining us. We were very excited to have you here. You asked some wonderful questions, really thoughtful questions, and hopefully we've provided some helpful answers. Any closing words from Cassia, Dr. Wells, Dr. Fisher, and Gayatri?
I can only say from both the scientific and my personal point of view, a lot better to be vaccinated than to get COVID.
Yeah, and just to emphasize that, all of medicine and public health is about balancing risks and benefits. And I think with the vaccines, the benefits are so much higher than the risks. And so that's why the whole community is really recommending it very strongly for everyone.
Definitely. And I also just think that the vaccines available now in America are truly a miracle that they've been produced as fast and as safely as they have been. And I'm very grateful to have been vaccinated myself. And I hope that you all will get vaccinated soon too.
And with that, I guess, thank you so much. Thank you for joining us, and hope to see you all in the future, fully vaccinated and with smiles on our faces.
Cool.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.
Thank you, everyone.